back to Cinematic. I'm Ryan Miller, and I actually love being wrong. Turns out, maybe that's why I've taken such a liking to YouTube, because somewhere, somehow, you're wrong. But when I said last time that we were doing an episode on The Magnificent Butcher, and that it was directed by Sammo Hung, I was wrong. It's starring Sammo Hung, but it's actually directed by Yuen Woo-ping. So what better way to be wrong? Yuen Woo-ping is huge. We've talked about him when it comes to Snake in the Eagle's Shadow. It was actually his first feature, but also there's an entire episode of Book Club for Movies out there on Drunken Master if you want to check it out. That's why I didn't talk about it here for Cinematic, but he's worked with everybody. In fact, some say he helped launch the careers of everybody. Jackie, Sammo, arguably with this movie, but also Yen Biao, who we are going to talk about. And Donnie Yen, Jet Li, and Wikipedia seems to think Michelle Yeoh, but I have a hard time thinking anybody launched her career but her, watching some of her early works like Yes Madam, even Super Cop for that matter, so grain of salt maybe there as far as that goes, but Yuen Woo-ping is huge and well represented on this Letterboxd list that I'm making my way through. I think he currently has at least 11 movies on the list, and that'll probably go up over time. I have added one even just since the last time we talked. So as a Yuen Woo-ping movie and as a Kung Fu movie even for this time period, there are some familiarities, I'm going to say. First up, it is still a Kung Fu comedy, and I know we've talked about how Ching Che and Lau Kar-leung were certainly taking a lighter tone with some of their movies that were coming out around the same time, but Yuen Woo-ping and Sammo Hung especially are in top form with The Magnificent Butcher as far as the Kung Fu comedy goes. Within the first minute, you got Sammo slipping on a banana peel. Not too long after that, there's an explosion that results in a soot-covered face with a big poofy hairdo, of course. A drunken beggar will enter the film, and at one point when he drinks, they do literally play the Popeye the Sailor Man theme, you know, when he eats his spinach. So there's that. And what Kung Fu comedy would be complete without a little bit of fart fu thrown in there? And I want to say some straight up Three Stooges references. So Yuen Woo-ping, Sammo, still innovating. I mean, this is kind of the tip of the spear still as far as this goes. But in the space of Kung Fu comedy, they are still kind of the masters. You know, I want to say for the most part, and maybe I'm biased at this point now, having watched a few of these, the comedy lands. So it's also another Wong Fei-hung movie. And in Drunken Master, Jackie literally played Wong Fei-hung. In this movie, he's more of a tertiary character, but the cast is kind of stacked. And Wong Fei-hung is played by an actor his name is Ta-King Kwan, who played Wong Fei-hung no less than 77 times in his 106 movies. And this was towards the end of his career, so you can imagine a really beloved actor at this point still. So he's in the mix. And you know, since he has a Kung Fu school, Wong Fei-hung, in fact, his students are played by Sammo, plays Lam Sai-wing, who is another real-life person, by the way. I don't know, have I mentioned that Wong Fei-hung is a real-life person? I should. I know I'm not going to do anybody justice here, but he was a real-life person known for being a physician and, yes, a martial arts master. He has become something of a folk hero in Chinese culture, so, you know, some of the things we will see in a Wong Fei-hung movie may not have happened in real life, but are nonetheless entertaining. Kind of the same thing would happen with Ip Man later on, certainly after Bruce Lee entered maybe his own folk hero category. So this is maybe one of the earliest examples of that, which I'm probably wrong. Cinematic examples, there we go, of that happening. So Wong Fei-hung's in here, his students played by Sammo, Lam Sai-wing, and Yuen Biao, who is another that we will talk about at some point. But maybe the last big staple you're going to see, not just for a Yuen Woo-ping movie, but for Kung Fu movies in general. You know, if there's a Wong Fei-hung school, there's going to be a rival school. Here, the rival school is Five Dragons, headed up by Sifu Ko, whose son, Ko Tai-hoi, is actually the big bad, I would say, throughout the majority of the film. The final fight is between Sammo and Sifu Ko, but Ko Tai-hoi does most of the bad stuff in this movie that we'll talk about. So as the story goes, Sammo's character's brother, Sai Kwang, comes to town with his wife looking for Sammo. There's a picture of Sammo when he was much younger, much skinnier. It also wouldn't be a Sammo movie if we didn't talk about his physique in one way or another. But in looking for Sammo, his wife is kidnapped by Ko Tai-hoi. And as he tries to take revenge, Sammo interrupts that street fight and defends Ko Tai-hoi unknowingly and beats up his brother. His brother becomes so dejected that he goes back to his room and tries to hang himself, but comedically. He does it comedically because this is also about the time the drunken beggar enters the picture. And it was actually, I found out, going to be played once again by Yen Wu-ping's dad, who played drunken beggar in, Beggar So, who taught Jackie Chan's character Wong Fei-hung. But in this movie, Yen Wu-ping's dad was going to reprise that role, but had his heart attack in between those two films. So in this movie, he is played by Fan Mei-sheng, who does a fantastic job regardless. Again, kind of a stacked cast here, who you might also notice the actor who plays Ko Tai-hoi is Fung Hak-an, who's been in, I think, 3 movies we've already talked about. In the background, more or less, but again, some of these guys are starting to look pretty familiar at this point. So, drunken beggar rescues Sammo's brother from hanging himself in his room, and also promises to help him get revenge on Sammo for interrupting his revenge itself. And in so doing, has a fight with Sammo that I kind of think is the centerpiece fight for the film. Every film seems to have one, or at least there's one I connect with more than others. And I think this is the one, basically, and we'll talk about the Kung Fu a little bit later, but basically until Sammo is then framed for the murder of Sifu Ko's goddaughter, who is murdered by Ko Tai-hoi, which, okay, this might be a little side note, but I can't not mention it, especially since it's going to color maybe all of the movies I watch and have watched. There is a little bit of violence against women, or woman, I guess you could say. It's acted out. I don't think there's actually, real contact going on, although we will talk about that a little bit later. I just find myself less willing to watch those nowadays. So it's nothing graphic. I did skip forward 30 seconds or whatever so it's probably not even that long either, but just a little too long for my taste. So just so you're aware, that's out there and you can skip it and you're not going to lose anything. But when Sifu Ko's goddaughter is murdered, Sammo is framed for it, and kind of all hell breaks loose in the form of some of the best Kung Fu I've seen yet. And it's strange because I did watch a trailer for this, and it was one that was made after one of the remasters came out. So they talk it up whenever that happens. They're like, one of the seminal Kung Fu movies. I don't know if it's one of the seminal Kung Fu movies, but it's way better than I gave it credit for. It was something that made my list, probably because more than a few people mentioned it, but I couldn't tell you why, and it's not certainly one I've continued to hear about, but I think it probably should be. So, fair warning. But the Kung Fu, the reason it's so good, I'll talk about a few things. Number one, it's fast, impossibly fast, literally. I'm pretty sure they're shooting 22 frames for some of this, which I know I talked about before in a previous film. I can't remember which one it was. And I don't think it was used as well as it's used here, because when it's used poorly, you can really tell. Here, it's perfect. If you know what you're looking for, you can sometimes pick it out, but that's kind of the gold standard. Although under-cranking the action, as they'll say, is not something that started with Hong Kong action, and it certainly hasn't ended with it. You probably just watched a film where they did the very same thing. So it would also become a staple in a lot of Jackie and Sammo's movies from here on out. But I just haven't noticed it a lot, and here, noticing it with a couple other things I'm going to mention, it does stand out a little bit more to me. I think it's perfect. When I talk about the gold standard, pretty much, and I can tell you this from experience, if you slow or speed something up by about 85% or 15% on either side, it's fairly imperceptible. So that's kind of what's going on here. The other thing that makes it stand out is that we're still talking about complicated choreography here. So the takes are still long. There's still, 10-ish moves to each take. So we can still check that box off. But I think the things that I want to call out that really hit home and I think point at this new wave that was cresting, for Sammo, Jackie, Yen Wu-ping, the whole group, Yen Biao, who we're going to talk about, I promise. Number one, actual contact. Sammo is known for hitting hard. And again, we're skipping around with some of these movies on the list, so there's a chance that this isn't the first movie we could talk about that with. But for the ones I'm watching, there's some real contact going on for sure. And they've started to do the thing where, you know how the big Jackie Chan stunts in his films, they'll slow it down or play it back a few times. They're doing a lot of those in slow motion here. Nothing as big as that. Again, this really seems like the tip of the spear as far as that goes. But there are numerous times, especially in the fight between Sammo and Ko Tai-hoi, who, yes, the movie is a comedy. I don't know, for the most part, 50-50. It strikes a real strange balance. I do think the comedy lands when it does land, but also the movie does get really brutal. In a not comedic way, Sammo's brother is killed, and so he is out for revenge. Again, not comedically. And in that fight with him and Ko Tai-hoi, who murders his brother, he is really throwing him through those walls, let's say, which is the other thing I want to talk about when it comes to the Kung Fu, when it comes to one of the things I want to call out as far as Sammo and Jackie's new wave. You will remember or know that they just demolish their environments. And there's a lot of that going on here. And you get the feeling, and I mentioned this about Sammo before, that they just walk into a room. In fact, as the story goes, they would often do it on set. They would walk into the room and kind of choreograph everything right then and there. You know, I'm sure that happened sometimes 100%. How much it was a combo of things, probably more than a few times, obviously. But the way he throws Ko Tai-hoi through some of those walls, it's just really happening. So there's a fair amount of that going on that really does remind me of some of their later works and is well worth viewing. And again, nothing as big as those classic Jackie and Sammo stunts, but still really good stuff. And the last thing I want to mention when it comes to pretty much everything I've talked about, but especially the Kung Fu, is Yuen Biao. And I know I've pronounced his name Yuen Biao at some point. I watched an interview with Jackie and Sammo where they were saying Yuen Biao, so I'll use them all just to be safe. But I am constantly surprised at how good that guy is. I don't think he gets his due. He really should be. He is often mentioned in the same breath because he is one of the 7 Little Fortunes, which we will talk about. He's from literally the same class of Peking Opera School as Jackie and Sammo, and there are 4 more. That's why there are 7. And I think I'll save talking about that until we watch the biopic that I think, might as well be wrong twice, Sammo directed later on, Painted Faces, I think it is. So that'll be on the list. But Yuen Biao is great. He's fantastic in this thing, and so much so that I've added one of his movies. I've added Yen Wu-ping's Yuen Biao vehicle. It's called Dreadnought, and it's just 2 movies down from here. It's not the next one we'll do, but that has been tentatively added to the list. I haven't vetted it yet, so it might disappear just as quickly. But for now, I need to add more Yuen Biao movies to the list. That's the takeaway here. So I don't really have anything bad to say necessarily about The Magnificent Butcher. Again, I'm warming up to the comedy aspects of the Kung Fu comedy and kind of the strange balance that they will sometimes find with that. But that's not apparent in The Magnificent Butcher, so there might still be a little bit of getting used to things as far as that goes, but I didn't have a real hard time with it, let's just say. So still a big fat recommendation for The Big Fat Magnificent Butcher. And if you liked that, you might enjoy next week, where we are going back to the chamber, my friends, with the return of the 36th chamber, which again, I haven't done a whole lot of pre-study on the movies that are coming up. So I'm assuming is another Lau Kar Lung feature. So come back next week and find out. That's what I say. And thank you for being here for this one. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter if you want. That's the kind of guy you are. I'm also making a go at Threads, where mostly just duplicating posts at this point, but I would hope at some point can just leave Twitter behind entirely. So find me there as well. Instagram, why not? And Patreon, where you can probably guilt-free do whatever you want and pledge any amount of money. I've recently relaunched everything. There's a new welcome video that points at a new podcast that talks about the retooled tiers, that mentions the new store where there's shirts available and more soon. So lots of stuff going on here, and I appreciate your attention to any of it, as always. In fact, there will also be a few new patrons on the screen in just a few seconds that I have yet to do their official shout-outs for. But Karina, Jonathan Blades, Sliptide, you're the best. You're amazing. And we're going to talk about why in the next actual episode of Ryan Runs. So come back for that and everything, as always, here on the channel or the podcast feed. So we'll see you next time.